She walked into that courtroom 7 months pregnant, no lawyer, no money, and no one on her side. Her billionaire husband sat across the room laughing, surrounded by four attorneys, completely certain he had already won. He had her committed to a psychiatric ward. He turned her best friend into a spy. He froze every bank account and locked her out of her own home. But what Nathan Mercer did not know was that the judge watching from the bench held a secret that would destroy everything he had built. If you love stories where the underdog rises and the villain gets exactly what he deserves, you are in the right place. Drop a comment telling me where you are watching from, and let us begin. The moment I saw my husband's hand on another woman's belly, I understood something that would change everything. The baby she was carrying was not a rumor. It was his insurance policy against me. But that realization came later. On the night of our 5th wedding anniversary, I still believed in the life we had built together. I still believed in Nathan Mercer. The rooftop of Mercer Tower glittered like a constellation had fallen from the sky and arranged itself just for us. 200 guests mingled beneath strings of golden lights, their champagne glasses catching the reflection of the Manhattan skyline. The August air was warm but not oppressive, carrying the distant sounds of the city below. I stood near the center of the celebration, 7 months pregnant in a white designer gown that had cost more than my first car. My hand rested on my swollen belly, feeling the occasional flutter of movement from the daughter I would soon meet. For a moment, watching the people I thought were my friends laugh and toast to our happiness, I felt genuinely grateful. Nathan approached the microphone at the edge of the platform, and the crowd quieted. He looked exactly like the man I had fallen in love with 6 years ago. Tall, broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair that gave him an air of distinguished authority. His smile was the same one that had convinced me to give up my career as a corporate lawyer to support his real estate empire. 5 years ago, Nathan began, his voice carrying easily across the rooftop, I married the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. Vivian Caldwell Mercer is not just my wife. She is my partner, my confidant, and soon, the mother of my child. The crowd murmured appreciatively. I felt tears prick at my eyes. To Vivian, Nathan said, raising his glass, the love of my life, here is to building our legacy together. 200 voices echoed the toast. I smiled at my husband, and he smiled back with what I believed was genuine love. Looking back now, I wonder how I missed the coldness behind his eyes. The party continued around me in a blur of congratulations and well wishes. I accepted compliments on my dress, my pregnancy glow, my wonderful husband. Each kind word felt like a small gift, a confirmation that the sacrifices I had made were worth it. Around 10 o'clock, the baby pressed against my bladder with particular insistence. I excused myself from a conversation with the wife of one of Nathan's investors and made my way toward the restrooms at the far end of the rooftop. The ladies' room was quieter than the party, the marble walls muffling the music and chatter outside. I entered a stall and had just settled in when I heard the door open and two women walk in, their heels clicking against the floor. Did you see Brooke's dress? One of them said. I recognized the voice as belonging to someone from Nathan's office, though I could not place the name. Bold choice, considering what the other woman asked, considering she is carrying his baby too. The first woman laughed, a sharp sound that echoed off the marble. I give the wife 6 months before she is replaced. Nathan has been planning this for months. The water glass I had been holding slipped from my fingers and shattered against the marble floor. The conversation stopped immediately. I heard hurried footsteps and the door swinging shut as the women fled. I sat frozen in the stall, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Brooke, Nathan's executive assistant, the woman who had organized this very party, who had smiled at me an hour ago and complimented my dress. I forced myself to stand, to unlock the stall door, to walk to the sink. The woman staring back at me in the mirror looked pale and frightened. Nothing like the confident hostess who had greeted guests earlier that evening. My hands were shaking as I gripped the edge of the counter. It could be gossip, I told myself. Office rumors. Nathan would never betray me like that. We were having a baby together. We had built a life together. But even as I thought the words, something cold settled in my chest. A memory surfaced unbidden. Nathan's late nights at the office, his sudden interest in my doctor's appointments, always wanting to know exactly when I would be home. The way Brooke looked at him when she thought no one was watching. I splashed water on my face and forced myself to breathe. I needed to find Nathan. I needed to hear him tell me this was all a misunderstanding. He was standing near the bar when I found him, laughing at something one of his investors had said. I touched his elbow gently. "Nathan," I said, keeping my voice low. "I need to speak with you privately." He glanced at me, his smile flickering with something that might have been annoyance. "Not now, Vivian. We have guests." "It is important," I insisted. Nathan excused himself from the investor and guided me toward a quieter corner of the rooftop. His hand on my back felt different now, less protective and more controlling. "What is it?" he asked. His tone clipped. "I heard something in the bathroom." I said, "About Brooke, about you and Brooke." For just a moment, Nathan's face went completely cold. It was like watching a mask slip to reveal something terrifying underneath. Then the warmth returned. So quickly I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. "You are being paranoid again," he said gently. "The doctor warned us about pregnancy hormones affecting your judgment. Remember, Pastor, this is not hormones, Nathan. They said she is pregnant with your child." Nathan sighed, the sound of a patient man dealing with an unreasonable request. "Brooke is pregnant. Yes, by her boyfriend of 3 years. I announced it at the office last month. People love to gossip. Vivian, you know that." He kissed my forehead and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the corner of my own anniversary party. 200 guests continued celebrating around me, and I had never felt more alone in my life. That night, after the guests had gone and Nathan had fallen asleep beside me, I made a decision. I would find proof. If my husband was telling the truth, I would find evidence of Brooke's boyfriend. If he was lying, I would find evidence of that too. I had no idea that the proof I was about to uncover would destroy everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my friends, and the man sleeping peacefully beside me. 3 weeks after the anniversary party, I had become someone I barely recognized. The trusting wife who had believed every word her husband said was gone, replaced by a woman who checked phone records and memorized schedules. Nathan had grown careless over the years, secure in the belief that I would never suspect him. His phone password was still our wedding date. When he showered each morning, he left the device charging on his nightstand, completely unprotected. On a Tuesday morning in early September, I made my move. Nathan was singing in the shower, something he only did when he was in a particularly good mood. I picked up his phone with trembling fingers and entered the password. The messages were right there in his recently deleted folder. Nathan was meticulous about deleting texts, but he had never learned that deleted messages stayed in a separate folder for 30 days. I scrolled through conversation after conversation between him and Brooke Ashford. "The divorce papers are ready. Once the baby is born, I will claim she is unfit." That was from 3 days ago. "I have already transferred $2 million to the offshore account. She will not see a penny." That was from last week. "When this is over, we will have everything. The company, the properties, the custody. Vivian will have nothing but her delusions." That was from the night of our anniversary party, sent while I was still greeting guests. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. I could hear the shower still running. Nathan's voice echoing off the tiles as he sang about having sunshine on a cloudy day. The irony was not lost on me. I took screenshots of everything, every message, every plan, every promise he had made to the woman carrying his child. Then I forwarded them to my personal email, deleted the forwarding record, and placed the phone back exactly where I had found it. When Nathan emerged from the bathroom, toweling his hair dry, I was sitting on the edge of the bed reading a pregnancy book. "You look pale," he observed. "Are you feeling all right?" "Just tired," I said. "The baby was active last night." He nodded, already moving toward his closet to select his suit for the day. I watched him dress with new eyes, seeing the stranger I had married for the first time. That afternoon, I met Margot Hensley at a cafe in the village, far from anywhere Nathan or his associates might spot us. Margot had been my best friend since law school, one of the few relationships I had managed to maintain despite Nathan's subtle isolation tactics. She was already seated when I arrived, her red hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her green eyes sharp with concern. Margot had never liked Nathan. She had told me so at our engagement party, and I had dismissed her concerns as jealousy. "You sounded terrible on the phone," she said as I lowered myself carefully into the chair across from her. "What is going on?" I slid my phone across the table, the screenshots already pulled up. "Read these." I watched Margot's face change as she scrolled through the messages. Shock, then anger, then something colder and more determined. When she looked up at me, her jaw was set. "That absolute bastard," she said quietly. "Vivian, you need a lawyer. Today." "I know, but I need more than these messages. I need financial records, witness statements, something that proves the scope of what he has been doing." Margot nodded slowly. "My brother works at First Manhattan Trust. That is where Nathan keeps his business accounts. I can ask him to look into any unusual transfers." "Would he do that?" "It could cost him his job." "For you, yes." Margot reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "We are going to get through this. I promise." For the first time in 3 weeks, I felt something other than fear. I felt hope. The lawyer Margot recommended was named Richard Sullivan, a partner at one of the city's most respected family law firms. His office was on the 42nd floor of the building that overlooked Central Park, and his handshake was firm and confident. "Mrs. Bucks Mercer," he said as I settled into the leather chair across from his desk. "Tell me everything." I did. I told him about the messages, the offshore accounts, the woman pregnant with my husband's child. I told him about the subtle ways Nathan had isolated me over the years, cutting me off from friends, discouraging me from returning to my legal career, making me financially dependent on him. Richard listened without interruption, taking occasional notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at me with something like respect. "These messages are damaging," he said, "but they are not enough on their own. Nathan will claim they were fabricated, taken out of context, or that you accessed his phone illegally. So what do I need?" "Bank records showing the transfers he mentioned. Witness statements from people who can testify to his relationship with Miss Ashford. Medical records proving her pregnancy timeline." Richard leaned forward. "This will not be easy. Mrs. Mercer, your husband has resources and connections. He will fight back hard." "I was a corporate lawyer for 8 years before I met Nathan," I said. "I know how to fight." Richard smiled slightly. "Good. You are going to need that." I left his office with a retainer agreement in my purse and a list of evidence I needed to gather. Margot texted me as I walked to the subway, confirming that her brother would look into Nathan's accounts. Everything was falling into place. That evening, I sat in the nursery we had decorated together, surrounded by pale yellow walls and stuffed animals still in their packaging. I placed my hand on my belly and felt my daughter kick against my palm. "I am going to protect you," I whispered, "no matter what it takes." For the first time in weeks, I felt in control. I had evidence. I had a plan. I had my best friend by my side and a lawyer ready to fight for me. The path forward was clear. I was so sure I had finally found solid ground. I did not realize I was standing on a trapdoor, and Nathan's hand was already on the lever. The morning started like any other. Nathan left for work at 7, kissing my forehead and reminding me to rest. I nodded and smiled, playing the role of the oblivious wife while counting the hours until my meeting with Richard Sullivan that afternoon. I had gathered more evidence over the past week. Margot's brother had confirmed suspicious transfers totaling over $40 million to offshore accounts. I had photographs of Nathan and Brooke leaving a hotel together, taken by a private investigator Richard had recommended. The case was building, and I was ready to file for divorce. I never made it to that meeting. At 2 o'clock, I was gathering my documents when I heard the front door open. Nathan never came home in the middle of the day. My heart began to pound as I shoved the papers into my bag and walked toward the foyer. Nathan stood in the entrance hall, still in his business suit. He was not alone. 2 police officers flanked him, their expressions carefully neutral. Behind them stood a woman I did not recognize, carrying a clipboard and wearing an official-looking badge. "Vivian," Nathan said, his voice heavy with manufactured concern. "I am so sorry it has come to this." "What is going on?" I demanded, my eyes darting between the officers. "Nathan, what have you done?" "Officers, this is my wife," Nathan said, ignoring my question. "As I mentioned, she has been experiencing severe mental instability. I am genuinely frightened for her safety and the safety of our unborn child. That is a lie, I said, my voice rising. Whatever he has told you is a lie. One of the officers stepped forward. His nameplate read Morrison. Mrs. Mercer, we have a court order for a psychiatric evaluation. You need to come with us. A court order on what grounds? Nathan produced a document from his jacket pocket. Dr. Catherine Pierce submitted an evaluation based on our recent sessions. She believes you are experiencing a psychotic break triggered by pregnancy hormones. I have never seen anyone named Catherine Pierce in my life, I said, backing away. This is Antina. I am a lawyer. You cannot just take someone for a psychiatric evaluation without evidence. The evaluation is the evidence, ma'am, Officer Morrison said patiently. The doctor has documented concerning behaviors, paranoid ideation, obsessive accusations against your husband, potential danger to yourself and your unborn child. I spun toward Nathan. You fabricated this. You knew I was going to file for divorce, so you fabricated this. Nathan shook his head sadly. You see what I mean? Officers, the paranoia, it breaks my heart. I have evidence, I said desperately. Evidence of his affair, his financial crimes. It is in my bag right now. I reached for my purse, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the strap. When I finally pulled out the folder of documents, Nathan's expression flickered with something that might have been alarm. Then he recovered. She has been collecting photographs and fabricating documents for weeks, he said. It is part of the delusion. Officer Morrison took the folder from my hands. He flipped through it briefly, then handed it to Nathan. Sir, you might want to hold on to these for the evaluation. No, I shouted, lunging for the folder. That is my evidence. You cannot give it to him. The second officer caught my arm, restraining me gently but firmly. Mrs. Mercer, you need to calm down. This behavior is not helping your case. I could feel myself spiraling, could see how my panic must look to these officers who had already been told I was unstable. Every word I said, every movement I made, seemed to confirm Nathan's narrative. The trap was perfect. Please, Bear, I said, forcing my voice to stay level. Please, just listen to me. My husband is having an affair. He has been planning to divorce me and take my child. Everything in that folder proves it. Nathan sighed heavily. She has been saying things like this for months. I tried to get her help privately, but she refused. When my friend Margot came to me yesterday, terrified about what Vivian had been telling her, I knew I had to act. The name hit me like a physical blow. Margot. Margot had gone to Nathan. No, I whispered. Margot is my friend. She would never. She was worried about you, Nathan said gently. A real friend knows when to ask for help. I thought of all the evidence I had shared with Margot, the screenshots, the financial records, my entire strategy. I had handed everything to Nathan's spy without even knowing it. The evaluation is 72 hours, the woman with the clipboard said, speaking for the first time. Standard protocol for situations like this. And if I refuse, I asked, then we would have to take you into custody anyway. Officer Morrison said, it would be better for everyone if you came voluntarily. I looked at Nathan, really looked at him, and saw the satisfaction he was trying to hide beneath his mask of concern. He had won. He had completely outmaneuvered me, and there was nothing I could do. Can I at least pack a bag? I asked, my voice barely audible. Nathan nodded magnanimously. Of course. Take your time. I walked to the bedroom on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. In the closet, I grabbed a small overnight bag and began throwing in clothes at random. My hands found my phone, and I desperately tried to call Richard Sullivan. The call went straight to voicemail. When I emerged, Nathan took the bag from me and handed it to one of the officers. For inspection, he explained, just to make sure she has not packed anything dangerous. They went through my belongings while I stood there, humiliated, in the foyer of my own home. My phone was confiscated. My documents were gone. The officers escorted me outside, where a car waited at the curb. Neighbors watched from their windows as I was led away. I could imagine the story Nathan would tell them. Poor Vivian, finally cracked under the pressure. He tried so hard to help her. It is for your own good, sweetheart, Nathan called from the doorway, waving sympathetically. In the back of that car, I understood the depth of my mistake. I had trusted the wrong person. I had underestimated my husband, and now I was being erased. Not with violence, but with paperwork and a sympathetic smile. 72 hours in a psychiatric ward would become 7 days. And in those 7 days, Nathan Mercer would dismantle every piece of my life. The Greenwood Psychiatric Center smelled like industrial cleaner and despair. They took my jewelry at the intake desk, logged my belongings in a plastic bin, and gave me a thin cotton gown that did nothing to preserve my dignity. The baby, I said to the nurse processing my admission. I am 7 months pregnant. I need to see my obstetrician. We have medical staff on site, she replied without looking up from her paperwork. They will monitor your condition. I need my actual doctor, Dr. Robert Matthews at Manhattan Presbyterian. That will not be possible during your evaluation period. She finally met my eyes. Mrs. Mercer, the sooner you cooperate, the sooner this process will be complete. They led me to a room with a single bed, a small window covered by wire mesh, and a door that locked from the outside. I sat on the edge of the mattress and stared at the white walls, trying to understand how my life had collapsed so completely in the span of a single afternoon. The first evaluation came that evening. A psychiatrist named Dr. Catherine Pierce, the same name Nathan had mentioned, sat across from me in a small office with fluorescent lighting that made everything look sickly and pale. Mrs. Mercer, she began, pen poised over her notepad. Tell me why you believe you are here. Because my husband fabricated a psychiatric evaluation to silence me before I could file for divorce, I said. He is having an affair. He has been hiding money in offshore accounts. I have evidence of all of it, but he confiscated everything before they brought me here. Dr. Pierce made a note. Your husband mentioned you might say something like that. He described it as paranoid ideation, a belief that others are conspiring against you. It is not paranoia if it is actually happening. That is what patients experiencing paranoid episodes often believe, she said gently. The delusion feels completely real to them. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Every instinct told me to argue, to insist on my sanity, but I had been a lawyer long enough to recognize a losing strategy when I saw one. What would it take, I asked carefully, for you to believe that I am telling the truth? Shire, Pierce tilted her head, studying me. That is an interesting question. Most patients in your situation become increasingly agitated when their reality is questioned. I am not most patients, she made another note, and I could not tell if my response had helped or hurt my case. The days blurred together in that place. I attended group therapy sessions where I said as little as possible. I met with Dr. Pierce daily, answering her questions in measured tones that I hoped demonstrated stability, rather than the screaming panic I felt inside. On the third day, Nathan came to visit. He brought his mother, Constance Mercer, a woman I had never managed to impress, despite 5 years of trying. They sat across from me in the visitor's room, Nathan in his expensive suit and Constance in her designer dress, looking at me like I was a science experiment that had gone wrong. You look tired, dear, Constance said, her sympathy as thin as tissue paper. We are so worried about you. Are you, I asked flatly. Because from where I am sitting, it looks like you are both exactly where you want me to be. Nathan leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that the nearby orderly could not hear. Fight me on this, and you will never see your child. Cooperate, and maybe we can work something out. What kind of something? A quiet divorce, generous terms. You walk away with enough to start over, and the baby stays with me. I stared at him. This man I had loved. This man I had built a life with. You want me to give you my daughter? I want what is best for everyone, Nathan said, including you. This does not have to be difficult. Constance nodded approvingly. Think about it. Vivian, you are clearly not well. Is this really the state you want to be in when you become a mother? I said nothing. There was nothing to say that would not be used against me. After they left, I returned to my room and sat on the bed, staring at the wire-covered window. The baby moved restlessly inside me, perhaps sensing my distress. I placed my hand on my belly and tried to find some reassurance in her kicks. On the 5th day, I was told my hold had been extended, 7 more days for additional evaluation. Why time? I demanded. I have been cooperative. I have attended every session. The nurse who delivered the news looked uncomfortable. Dr. Pierce noted continued signs of paranoid ideation and hostility toward family members. She believes more time is needed. Hostility. My husband threatened me in the visitor's room. Did she note that? I am sorry, Mrs. Mercer. The decision has been made. That night, I broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. I lay in my narrow bed and sobbed into my pillow, muffling the sound so the night staff would not add emotional instability to my chart. I stopped eating on day 6. Not as a protest. I simply could not make myself swallow food. I would stare at the trays they brought me and feel nothing but nausea. The worst part of gaslighting is not the lies. It is when you start believing them. Lying in that room, exhausted and isolated and utterly alone. I began to wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe I had imagined the messages on Nathan's phone. Maybe Margot had genuinely been concerned about me. Maybe I was losing my mind, and everyone was just trying to help. On the 7th night, when I had almost given up entirely, a nurse I did not recognize came into my room during the late shift. She moved quietly, checking my chart, adjusting my blankets. Then she slipped something under my pillow. "Do not read it until I leave," she whispered, "and destroy it when you are done." Before I could respond, she was gone. I waited 5 minutes, my heart pounding, then pulled out the folded paper. In neat handwriting, it read, "Your lawyer has not abandoned you. They are fighting the hold. Do not give up. D.W." I did not know who D.W. was. I did not know how they had gotten a message into a psychiatric facility. But for the first time in 7 days, I felt something other than despair. I tore the note into tiny pieces and flushed them down the toilet, then lay back in bed and stared at the ceiling. Someone was fighting for me. I was not as alone as Nathan wanted me to believe. The emergency hearing to challenge my psychiatric hold was scheduled for day 9. I appeared via video conference from a small room at the facility, my face displayed on a screen in a courtroom I could not see properly. The judge was a woman named Patricia Winters, her expression unreadable through the grainy video feed. Nathan's lawyer, Preston Hale, sat at one table looking supremely confident. My chair at the other table was empty. "Mrs. Mercer," Judge Winters said, "I understand your counsel withdrew from representation. Is that correct?" I felt my stomach drop. Richard Sullivan had withdrawn. Nathan's reach was even longer than I had imagined. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I was informed this morning. Do you wish to request a continuance to obtain new counsel?" I thought about it for approximately 3 seconds. More time meant more days in this facility, more opportunities for Nathan to strengthen his case, more chances for my resolve to crumble. "No, Your Honor, I will represent myself." Preston Hale's eyebrows rose slightly. Judge Winters made a note. "Very well. Mr. Hale, you may present your argument for continuation of the hold." Preston stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. "Your Honor, my client is deeply concerned for his wife's mental state. Dr. Catherine Pierce, a respected psychiatrist, has documented paranoid delusions, obsessive behavior, and potential danger to herself and her unborn child. Mr. Mercer requests that the hold be extended to ensure proper treatment." "I see, well." Judge Winters turned to me. "Mrs. Mercer, your response." I took a deep breath. This was the moment. Everything I had learned in law school, everything I had practiced in 8 years as a corporate attorney, came down to this. "Your Honor, I request that the court order an independent psychiatric evaluation." Preston interjected immediately. "Your Honor, Dr. Pierce is eminently qualified and has been treating Mrs. Mercer for the duration of her stay." "Dr. Pierce was retained by my husband before my admission," I countered. "She submitted her initial evaluation without ever examining me. I have never met her in a clinical setting prior to being taken into custody." Judge Winters leaned forward. "Is that accurate, Mr. Hale?" Preston hesitated. "Dr. Pierce has an established relationship with the Mercer family." "That is not what I asked. Did she examine Mrs. Mercer before submitting the evaluation that led to this hold?" The silence stretched for several seconds. "I would need to verify the timeline." Preston finally said, "I request an immediate independent evaluation by a court-appointed psychiatrist." I pressed, and I request access to the original documentation submitted in support of my commitment. Judge Winters nodded slowly. I am going to grant both requests, Mr. Hale. Your client will provide all documentation within 24 hours. Dr. Robert Matthews, I see from the record, is Mrs. Mercer's obstetrician. I am ordering a consultation with him regarding the impact of continued detention on her pregnancy, and I am appointing Dr. James Mitchell for an independent psychiatric evaluation. Your Honor, Preston objected. This is highly irregular. What is irregular? Mr. Hale is a pregnant woman being committed on an evaluation that may have preceded any actual examination. Court is adjourned until the independent evaluation is complete. The screen went black, and I was alone in the small room again. But for the first time in 9 days, I felt like I could breathe. Dr. James Mitchell arrived the following afternoon. He was older than Dr. Pierce, with kind eyes and a manner that suggested he had seen enough to know the difference between genuine illness and manufactured convenience. Tell me what happened, he said simply, in your own words. So I did. I told him everything, from the anniversary party to the bathroom conversation to the evidence I had gathered and lost. I told him about Margot's betrayal and Nathan's threats in the visitor's room. I told him about the isolation and the despair and the moments when I had almost believed I was actually losing my mind. Mitchell listened without interruption, asking occasional questions about timelines and specific symptoms. When I finished, he sat quietly for a moment. Mrs. Mercer, he said finally, in my professional opinion, you are experiencing situational stress consistent with the circumstances you have described. I see no evidence of psychotic disorder, paranoid ideation, or any condition that would warrant involuntary commitment. You believe me. I believe that your responses are logical. Your memory is intact, and your emotional state is appropriate to someone who has been through a significant trauma. He closed his notebook. I will be submitting my report to Judge Winters this evening. The hold was lifted the next morning. I walked out of Greenwood Psychiatric Center into brilliant September sunshine, squinting against the light after so many days in fluorescent gloom. I had no phone, no money, and no idea where to go. But I was free. The first thing I did was find a payphone. They still existed. I discovered, though they were increasingly rare, I called Richard Sullivan's office. I am sorry, his secretary said. Mr. Sullivan is no longer able to represent you. Can you tell me why? A pause. I am not authorized to discuss the details. I can only say that Mr. Sullivan received information that made continued representation impossible. Nathan, of course it was Nathan. I hung up and leaned against the phone booth, trying to think. I had no lawyer, no money, and no support system. My best friend had betrayed me. My husband had tried to have me committed. Every person I had trusted had either abandoned me or turned against me. But I was free. I was still pregnant with my daughter, and I was not going to give up. I started walking. I was not sure where I was going, only that I needed to move, to think, to plan my next step. The baby shifted inside me, and I placed my hand on my belly reassuringly. We are okay, I whispered. We are going to figure this out. I was free. I had beaten the first trap. I would file for divorce immediately, find new evidence, start over if I had to. I had no idea that Nathan was 3 steps ahead of me, or that the worst was still to come. The taxi dropped me at the entrance of the brownstone I had called home for 5 years. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at the familiar brick facade and the windows I had decorated with my own hands. Then I noticed the security guard standing at the door. He was not one of our usual staff. He was younger, broader, with the alert posture of someone expecting trouble. When I approached the steps, he moved to block my path. Mrs. Mercer, he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Yes, this is my home. Please step aside. He pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket and handed it to me. I am sorry, ma'am. You are not permitted on this property. I unfolded the paper with fingers that had gone numb. It was a restraining order, filed by Nathan Mercer, claiming that I had made threats against him and the household staff during my psychiatric episode. The order prohibited me from coming within 500 feet of our home, his office, or any of his associates. This is insane, I said, my voice rising. I have been in a psychiatric facility for the past 10 days. I could not have threatened anyone. I am just following orders, ma'am. If you do not leave, I will have to call the police. I looked past him at the door to my home, at the life I had built, at everything I had worked for. Then I turned and walked away. The bank was my next stop. Our joint accounts were handled by First Manhattan Trust, the same bank where Margot's brother worked. I had no identification, no phone, nothing but the clothes I had been wearing when they took me to Greenwood. But I knew our account numbers by heart, and I was still Vivian Caldwell Mercer, co-owner of those accounts. I am sorry, Mrs. Mercer, the branch manager said after consulting her computer. All joint accounts have been frozen pending divorce proceedings. Frozen on whose authority? The order came from your husband's legal team. Standard procedure in high-asset divorce cases. What about my personal account? The one in my name only. She typed for a moment, then frowned. That account was closed 3 days ago. The remaining balance was transferred to the joint account before the freeze. My husband was a co-signer on that account. I said, realization dawning. He closed it himself. I am not able to discuss the specifics. I can only tell you that the account no longer exists. I walked out of the bank with $47 in my wallet. That was all I had left of a marriage worth over $200 million. The newsstand on the corner caught my eye. More specifically, the tabloid displayed prominently on the rack caught my eye. The headline read, Mercer heiress hospitalized inside the mental breakdown of a real estate queen. I picked up the magazine with trembling hands. There were photographs of me being escorted into Greenwood, looking disheveled and confused. Photographs of Nathan looking worried and sympathetic outside the facility. A quote from an unnamed source describing my erratic behavior and paranoid delusions. The story painted a picture of a woman who had cracked under the pressure of pregnancy and an affair that existed only in her imagination. Nathan was portrayed as the loving husband who had tried everything to help his troubled wife. The subtext was clear, whatever happened in the divorce. Nathan Mercer was the victim. My phone buzzed in my pocket before I remembered that I did not have a phone. Then I realized it was not my phone. Someone had slipped a prepaid device into my bag during my release from Greenwood, and I had not noticed until now. The message was from an unknown number. Check the news. This is just the beginning. You need help. Meet me at Washington Square Park, North Fountain, 8 p.m. DWW. The same initials from the note in the psychiatric facility. I spent the next several hours wandering the city, trying to figure out my options. I had no home, no money, no friends, and no way to fight back against a man who had already proven he could have me locked up on fabricated charges. Every person I passed seemed to be looking at me with recognition and judgment, probably my imagination. But the magazine was everywhere. My face was everywhere. The story of my breakdown was everywhere. By 7:30, I had found a bench in Washington Square Park. I sat there watching the fountain and feeling my daughter move inside me, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. I was 7.5 months pregnant. I was homeless. I was broke. I had been publicly humiliated and professionally destroyed. The man I had loved had systematically dismantled my entire existence, and I had no way to fight back. My phone vibrated again. A text from an old law school friend. I had no idea you were struggling. Nathan seems so worried about you. Then another from a former colleague. Thinking of you during this difficult time. Please let me know if there is anything I can do. Then another. Saw the article. He's so sorry for what you are going through. Nathan mentioned you had not been yourself lately. Nathan had reached out to everyone I knew. He was controlling the narrative even now, making sure that anyone who might have helped me had already been convinced that I was the unstable one, the dangerous one, the one who needed to be managed rather than supported. I sat on that park bench at 9 o'clock, watching the last light fade from the sky. The fountain had been turned off for the evening. The park was emptying, and I was completely alone. I placed both hands on my belly and felt my daughter kick against my palms. She was still there, still fighting, still counting on me to protect her. I closed my eyes and did something I had not done in years. I prayed, not for victory, not for revenge, just for the strength to survive the night. I am sorry, I whispered to my daughter. I am so sorry I could not protect us. The sound of a car pulling up to the curb made me look up. A black sedan had stopped nearby, its windows tinted dark. The rear window rolled down, and a man I had never seen before looked out at me. "Mrs. Mercer," he asked. "Who are you?" "My name is Douglas Whitmore," he said. "And Nathan Mercer destroyed me too." "Get in the car. We have a lot to discuss." Douglas Whitmore's apartment occupied the entire top floor of a building in Tribeca, far enough from the Mercer properties that Nathan's surveillance would not extend here. He led me to a sitting room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River and gestured for me to sit. "Before we begin," he said, pouring 2 glasses of water, "I need you to understand something. I am not doing this out of charity. I am doing this because Nathan Mercer stole $40 million from me 3 years ago, and I have been waiting for an opportunity to return the favor." "How did he steal from you?" Douglas sat across from me, his expression hardening. "We were partners in a development project in Chelsea. I provided the financing. He provided the connections. When the project succeeded beyond our expectations, he used a legal technicality to push me out and keep all the profits." He took a long drink of water. "It took me a year to rebuild my reputation and another year to start gathering evidence against him. But I could never find a way to use it without exposing myself to retaliation. And now you are going to file for divorce. Everything I have will become part of the public record, admissible in court, protected by judicial process. Nathan will not be able to bury it, and he will not be able to come after me without admitting his own guilt." I studied him carefully. Douglas Whitmore was perhaps 50 years old, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He looked like a man who had learned the hard way not to trust anyone. "What exactly do you have?" I asked. He stood and walked to a desk in the corner, returning with a thick manila folder. "Bank records showing hidden accounts totaling $47 million, payments to city officials for zoning approvals, evidence of tax fraud spanning 6 years." He paused. "And something else that will be particularly interesting to you." "What?" "Brooke Ashford's baby is not Nathan's." I stared at him. "How do you know that?" "Because it is mine." Douglas's expression was complicated, somewhere between shame and defiance. "We had an affair 18 months ago. It ended badly. She went to Nathan either for revenge or opportunity. I am not sure which. I did not know she was pregnant until recently." "Does Nathan know?" "No, he believes the child is his. He has been planning his entire strategy around presenting himself as a devoted father who needs custody of both children." Douglas smiled grimly. "I have DNA evidence that will destroy that narrative." I leafed through the folder, my legal training kicking in as I assessed each document. The financial records were damning. The bribery evidence was explosive. And the DNA test, obtained from a coffee cup Brooke had discarded, was verified by an independent laboratory. "This is enough to put him in prison," I said quietly. "Yes, but only if it is presented correctly. Nathan has connections in the district attorney's office. If this goes through normal channels, it will disappear." Douglas leaned forward. "It needs to come out in open court, in front of witnesses and reporters. A divorce hearing is perfect." "I do not have a lawyer." Nathan pressured mine to withdraw. "I know. That is why I am offering you something else." He gestured to the apartment around us. "Stay here while you prepare your case. I will provide food, medical care, and access to every document I have. You were a corporate lawyer for 8 years. You know how to build a case. You want me to represent myself. I want you to do whatever it takes to put Nathan Mercer on the public record as the fraud he is." Douglas met my eyes. "You are not doing this for me, Mrs. Mercer. You are doing it for yourself and your daughter. I am just providing the ammunition." I thought about it for a long moment. 2 weeks ago, I had been a wealthy wife with a loving husband and a baby on the way. Now I was homeless, broke, and facing a man who had already proven he could destroy my life with a phone call. But I was also a lawyer, a good one, before I had given it up for Nathan, and I still remembered how to fight. "One condition," I said finally. "If I do this, I do it my way. You do not interfere with my strategy. You do not contact Nathan or anyone else involved, and you do not try to control the outcome." Douglas nodded. Agreed. "Then we have a deal." The next 2 weeks were the most intense of my life. I spent every day reviewing documents, on organizing evidence, and preparing cross-examinations. Douglas had a law library in his apartment, and I devoured it, refreshing my knowledge of family law and criminal procedure. I also prepared myself physically. The baby was due in 6 weeks, and I needed to be strong enough to stand in court and face the man who had tried to destroy me. I ate properly for the first time in weeks. I slept in a real bed. I began to feel like a human being again rather than a victim. On the 14th day, I received notice of the divorce hearing. Nathan had pushed for an expedited timeline, probably hoping to catch me unprepared. The hearing was scheduled for 3 days from now. I reviewed the notice carefully, looking for any traps Nathan might have laid. Then I saw the name of the presiding judge and felt the blood drain from my face. "What is it?" Douglas asked, noticing my reaction. "The judge," I said quietly. "His name is Raymond Caldwell. Do you know him?" I looked up at Douglas, feeling the weight of 8 years of silence pressing down on me. "He is my father. We have not spoken since he left my mother when I was 24. Douglas absorbed this information. "Will that be a problem?" I thought about the man I remembered, the brilliant legal mind who had taught me to think like a lawyer before abandoning us without explanation. I thought about the years of anger and hurt that had followed, and the silence I had maintained even when I saw his name in legal publications. "I do not know. I am fine." I admitted. "He may not even recognize me. I was Vivian Caldwell then. Now I am Vivian Mercer." Do you want to request a different judge?" I considered it. A different judge would be safer, more predictable. But there was something about the coincidence that felt significant, like the universe was offering me a test I was not sure I could pass. "No," I said finally. "I will face whatever comes." 3 days later, I put on the best clothes Douglas could provide and walked into a courtroom to fight for my life. The courtroom was already full when I arrived. Reporters lined the back wall, notebooks ready. Every bench was occupied by spectators who had come expecting spectacle. The Mercer divorce had been tabloid fodder for weeks, and everyone wanted to see the mentally unstable wife face off against her wealthy husband. I walked slowly toward the front of the room, my hand resting on my pregnant belly. I was 8 months along now, and every step required careful balance. But I kept my posture straight and my expression calm. I would not give them the fragile victim they expected. Nathan was already seated at his table, flanked by Preston Hale and 3 other attorneys. He looked exactly like a man who believed he had already won. His posture was relaxed, his suit impeccable, his smile confident. When he saw me enter alone, he laughed. "No lawyer," he said to Preston, loud enough for the nearby reporters to hear. "This is going to be quick." Brooke Ashford sat in the gallery behind him, her pregnancy visible beneath a designer dress. She avoided my eyes, but I saw her hand resting protectively on her stomach. She did not know yet that her entire strategy was built on a lie. The bailiff called the court to order. "All rise." Judge Raymond Caldwell entered from chambers and took his seat behind the bench. He was older than I remembered, his hair completely gray now, but his eyes were the same, sharp, intelligent, missing nothing. He surveyed the courtroom briefly, his gaze passing over me without any sign of recognition. Then he picked up the case file and began reviewing it. "Please be seated," he said. His voice was exactly as I remembered it, calm and authoritative. I sat at my table, the single folder Douglas had helped me compile placed neatly in front of me. Nathan's team had boxes of documents, a paralegal, and the full weight of one of the city's most aggressive law firms. I had the truth. "This court will hear the matter of Mercer versus Mercer," Judge Caldwell announced. "Petition for divorce with claims of financial misconduct and custody disputes." He looked at Preston. "Counsel for the respondent, please state your appearance." Preston Hale of Hale, Morrison and Associates, appearing for Nathan Mercer. "Your Honor." The judge turned to me, and for the petitioner I stood. Vivian Caldwell Mercer, appearing pro se. "Your Honor." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Caldwell's expression did not change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes when I said my full name. Recognition, perhaps, or maybe just surprise. "Mrs. Mercer," he said carefully, "you understand the implications of representing yourself in a matter of this complexity." "Yes, Your Honor. I was a corporate attorney for 8 years before my marriage. I am prepared to proceed." Nathan snorted derisively. Preston placed a restraining hand on his arm. Very well, Judge Caldwell said. We will proceed. Mr. Hale, you may deliver your opening statement. Preston rose smoothly, buttoning his jacket. He delivered a polished narrative that painted Nathan as a devoted husband and concerned father. He described my psychiatric episode with sympathetic language that somehow made it sound both genuine and damning. He expressed concern for my unborn child and questioned whether I was stable enough to be a mother. Throughout his statement, I took notes and remained impassive. When he finished, Nathan nodded approvingly. Mrs. Mercer, Judge Caldwell said, your opening statement. I stood and walked to the center of the courtroom, facing the judge directly. Your Honor, I began, I am not here to prove that I am sane. I am here to prove that my husband is a fraud. The room went silent. Even the reporters stopped writing. I will present evidence of hidden assets totaling $47 million. I will present evidence of bribery, tax evasion, and criminal fraud. I will present evidence that my psychiatric commitment was fabricated to silence me before I could expose these crimes. I paused. Every document I present has been verified. Every claim I make is supported. Every lie my husband has told will be exposed before this court concludes. Nathan's smile had disappeared. Preston leaned over to whisper urgently in his ear. Additionally, I continued, I will demonstrate that the woman sitting in this courtroom, presented as carrying my husband's child, is in fact carrying the child of another man entirely. The father-to-be narrative that underpins my husband's custody claims is a complete fabrication. Brooke went pale. Nathan's head snapped toward her, confusion and anger warring on his face. Judge Caldwell raised his hand. Mrs. Mercer, these are serious allegations. Do you have evidence to support them? I do. Your Honor, I am prepared to present it in the proper procedural order. He nodded slowly. Then we will proceed. Mr. Byron Hale, call your first witness. Preston stood, still visibly rattled. The respondent calls Margot Hensley. Margot walked to the witness stand with her head down, refusing to meet my eyes. She looked thinner than I remembered, her face drawn with stress. Preston walked her through her prepared testimony. She described my erratic behavior over the past several months. She talked about my paranoid accusations against Nathan. She explained how she had gone to Nathan out of genuine concern for my well-being. When Preston finished, he returned to his seat looking pleased. Nathan had recovered his composure, watching Margot with approval. Mrs. Mercer, Judge Caldwell said, you may cross-examine. I approached the witness's stand slowly, giving myself time to think. Margot finally looked at me, and I saw fear in her eyes. Mrs. Hensley, I began quietly. How long have we been friends? 15 years, she whispered. And in those 15 years, before my marriage to Nathan, did you ever witness any signs of mental instability from me? She hesitated. No. Did I ever express paranoid beliefs about anyone? No. No. Did I ever behave in a way that concerned you for my safety? No, I nodded. Now, you testified that you went to my husband because you were concerned about me. When exactly did you first contact him? Margot glanced at Preston. I do not remember the exact date. Let me help you. Was it before or after I showed you the evidence of his affair and financial fraud? Preston stood, objection, leading the witness. Overruled, Judge Caldwell said. The witness may answer. Margot's face crumpled. After, she admitted. And when you contacted my husband, did he offer you anything in exchange for your concern? I do not know what you mean. I returned to my table and withdrew a bank statement. Your Honor, I would like to enter this document as Exhibit A. It shows a wire transfer of $500,000 from an account controlled by Nathan Mercer to an account in the name of Margot Hensley, dated 3 days after I confided in her. The room erupted. Reporters surged forward. Nathan shot to his feet, shouting objections. Judge Caldwell gavelled for order. Through it all, Margot sat on the witness stand and began to cry. He said he would destroy my family, she sobbed. He said he would ruin my husband's business if I did not help him. The first crack in Nathan's armor had appeared, and I was just getting started. The courtroom reconvened after a tense recess. Nathan had spent the break huddled with his legal team, their whispered conversation increasingly heated. Whatever confidence he had walked in with was eroding by the minute. Judge Caldwell called the proceedings to order. Miss Mercer, you may continue with your case. I stood. I called Patricia Brennan to the stand. Patricia was a bank officer at First Manhattan Trust, the institution that handled the Mercer family accounts. She was a serious woman in her 50s, with reading glasses perched on her nose and a folder of documents clutched to her chest. After she was sworn in, I approached with my prepared questions. Mrs. Brennan, you have access to the accounts associated with the Nathan Mercer in the Mercer Development Corporation. Is that correct? Yes, she confirmed. In the course of your duties, have you observed any unusual financial activity in those accounts? Patricia opened her folder. Yes. Over the past 3 years, there have been numerous transfers to offshore accounts that do not appear on any company reports. The total amount transferred is approximately $47 million. Preston Hale stood immediately. Objection? This witness is revealing confidential banking information. Your Honor, I responded. I obtained a subpoena for these records through proper legal channels. The documents were provided to opposing counsel 3 days ago. Judge Caldwell looked at Preston. Did you receive these documents? Preston hesitated. We received a large volume of discovery materials. We may not have reviewed every document. That is your responsibility. Mr. Hale, objection overruled. I turned back to Patricia. Were these transfers authorized by both account holders? No, she said. They were authorized solely by Mr. Mercer. Mrs. Mercer was not informed. And can you identify the recipients of these transfers? Patricia consulted her documents. Several went to numbered accounts in the Cayman Islands. Others went to individuals, including a payment of $2 million to Miss Brooke Ashford and a payment of $500,000 to Dr. Catherine Pierce. The name hit the courtroom like a bomb. Dr. Catherine Pierce, the psychiatrist who had submitted the evaluation that got me committed. $500,000, I repeated. To the doctor who declared me mentally unstable. Yes, the transfer occurred 1 week before your commitment. Nathan shot to his feet. This is a fabrication. Those records have been manipulated? Judge Caldwell's voice was ice. Mr. Mercer, sit down and remain silent. You will have an opportunity to respond through counsel. Nathan sat, but his face had gone pale. I dismissed Patricia Brennan and called my next witness. I called Brooke Ashford to the stand. Brooke walked to the witness stand like she was heading to her execution. Her eyes darted between Nathan and the door, as if calculating whether she could escape. Miss Ashford, I began, you are currently pregnant, is that correct? Yes. Her voice was barely audible. And you have told my husband that the child is his. Yes. Miss Ashford, I am going to show you a document. I handed her a copy of the DNA test results. This is a laboratory analysis of genetic material obtained from a coffee cup you discarded 6 weeks ago, compared with genetic material from both Nathan Mercer and Douglas Whitmore. Can you read the conclusion for the court? Brooke's hands were shaking. She stared at the document for a long moment. Miss Ashford, Judge Caldwell prompted. It says, she whispered, that Douglas Whitmore is the biological father of my child, not Nathan Mercer. The courtroom exploded. Nathan was on his feet again, this time advancing toward Brooke with fury on his face. You lying, he started. 2 bailiffs intercepted him before he could reach the witness stand. Judge Caldwell's gavel cracked repeatedly against the bench. Order, order in this court. He pointed at Nathan. Mr. Mercer, one more outburst and you will be held in contempt. Bailiffs, escort him back to his seat. They deposited Nathan in his chair, where he sat trembling with rage. Brooke was crying silently on the witness stand. The deception regarding paternity is relevant to Mr. Mercer's custody claims, I said, addressing the judge. He has presented himself as a father of 2 children who deserves primary custody. In fact, only one of those children is his. I dismissed Brooke and called my final witness. I call Constance Mercer to the stand. The murmur that went through the courtroom was one of genuine shock. Nathan's mother had been sitting in the gallery throughout the proceedings, her expression unreadable. Now she rose and walked to the witness stand with the dignity of a woman who had made a difficult decision. Mrs. Mercer, I said after she was sworn in, you are Nathan Mercer's mother, is that correct? Yes. And you visited me during my time at Greenwood Psychiatric Center. Yes, I did. During that visit, did your son say anything to me regarding my future custody of my child? Constance looked directly at Nathan for the first time. Something passed between them, a communication I could not interpret. My son told you that if you fought him, you would never see your child. He told you to cooperate and maybe he would give you generous terms in the divorce. Nathan looked like he had been struck. Mother, he breathed. What are you doing? Constance continued, her voice steady. After that visit, Nathan asked me to testify against you. He wanted me to say that you had exhibited unstable behavior, that you were unfit to be a mother. She paused. When I refused, he threatened to cut off my financial support. He told me he would destroy anyone who stood in his way, including me. Why are you testifying now? I asked. Constance finally looked at me, and I saw something like respect in her eyes. Because I watched you in that facility, and I saw a woman who was completely sane being treated like she was broken. I could not live with myself if I helped my son continue that injustice. The testimony concluded. Judge Caldwell called for a brief recess to review the evidence. During the break, Nathan sat alone at his table. His legal team had physically separated themselves from him and, standing in a cluster near the door, Preston Hale looked like a man watching his career implode. I remained at my table, organizing my documents, preparing for whatever came next. The baby kicked hard against my ribs, as if urging me forward. When court reconvened, Judge Caldwell's expression was grave. Before we proceed to closing arguments, he said, there is a matter that must be addressed. During the course of these proceedings, I have become aware of a prior familial connection between myself and one of the parties. The room went silent. Mrs. Mercer, he continued, looking directly at me for the first time. Vivian Grace Caldwell Mercer is my biological daughter. We have been estranged for 8 years. The revelation landed like a thunderclap. Nathan surged forward, finally seeing an angle of attack. Your Honor, this entire hearing is compromised. I demand a mistrial. Judge Caldwell raised his hand. Sit down, Mr. Mercer. I am not finished. Judge Raymond Caldwell looked out at the courtroom with an expression that revealed nothing of his internal thoughts. His voice remained steady and professional, even as he delivered news that would change everything. I will recuse myself from issuing the final ruling in this matter, he announced. However, I want to be clear about several things. First, I did not know Mrs. Mercer would be appearing in my courtroom. Second, she did not know I would be presiding. Third, and most importantly, the evidence presented in this hearing stands on its own merit, regardless of any familial connection. He turned to his clerk. Contact Judge Richard Blackwell and arrange for immediate reassignment. All findings of fact entered into the record will remain intact. Nathan saw his opportunity slipping away. Your Honor, with respect, how can any of this evidence be trusted when the petitioner clearly had inside assistance? Judge Caldwell's eyes met Nathan's, and for the first time, I saw my father's legendary courtroom authority in full force. Mr. Mercer, he said quietly, I have presided over hundreds of cases in my career. I have never seen evidence manipulated from the bench, and I am certainly not going to start with my own daughter. The documents Mrs. Mercer presented were obtained through legal channels, verified by independent sources, and provided to your counsel in discovery. Your failure to review them is not this court's problem. He stood. I am also referring all financial evidence to the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Investigation. What I have heard today suggests patterns of fraud, bribery, and witness tampering that extend far beyond a divorce proceeding. Nathan went white. His hand gripped the table in front of him like it was the only thing holding him upright. Court is in recess until Judge Blackwell is available, my father said. Then he left the bench. The recess lasted 4 hours. During that time, I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, trying to process everything that had happened. My father had acknowledged me publicly. He had protected the integrity of my case. And then he had walked away without saying a single word to me directly. The complexity of our relationship, 8 years of silence and hurt, could not be resolved in a courtroom. But something had shifted. Something small but significant. Nathan found me during the recess. He cornered me near the water fountain, his face contorted with rage. You think you have won, he hissed. I will destroy you. I will take that baby. I will make sure you never work again, never have another relationship, never know a moment of peace. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The recording app was already running. You are being recorded. Nathan, everything you just said is going to the district attorney. His face went slack with horror. He lunged for the phone, but courthouse security was already moving toward us. They had been watching from the moment Nathan approached me. Mr. Mercer, one of them said, you need to step away from Mrs. Mercer. She provoked me, Nathan sputtered. She is recording me illegally. We are in a public building, sir. There is no expectation of privacy. The guard positioned himself between us. I suggest you return to the courtroom and wait for the judge. Nathan retreated, but not before shooting Marta a look of pure hatred. I smiled at him pleasantly and saved the recording. Judge Richard Blackwell was everything my father was not. Brusque, impatient, clearly annoyed at being pulled into a high-profile case with complicated family dynamics. But he was also thorough. He reviewed the evidence, read the transcripts, and listened to brief closing arguments from both sides. Then he delivered his ruling. The evidence presented clearly establishes a pattern of financial fraud, coercive control, and witness manipulation by Mr. Mercer. He said, the respondent's claims regarding the petitioner's mental instability are not supported by independent medical evaluation and appear to have been fabricated as part of a deliberate strategy to discredit her. He looked at Nathan with undisguised contempt. Full divorce is granted. Mrs. Mercer will retain 60% of marital assets, including the brownstone residence that was purchased during the marriage. Mr. Mercer is ordered to pay all legal fees incurred by Mrs. Mercer in these proceedings. Full custody of the unborn child is awarded to Mrs. Mercer, with visitation rights to be determined after Mr. Mercer completes a psychological evaluation of his own. Nathan's lawyer tried to object, but Judge Blackwell cut him off. Furthermore, a restraining order is issued prohibiting Mr. Mercer from approaching Mrs. Mercer or her child for a period of 5 years. All evidence of financial crimes has been forwarded to the district attorney. Mr. Mercer, I strongly suggest you retain criminal defense counsel. He struck his gavel once. This court is adjourned. They led Nathan away in handcuffs 30 minutes later. The assault charge from the hallway confrontation, combined with the evidence of witness tampering, was enough for immediate arrest. He would spend the night in jail for the first time in his privileged life. 1 week later, I sat in a quiet cafe near the river, watching the water and waiting. When my father walked in, I felt my heart rate increase despite my best efforts to stay calm. He sat across from me without speaking. We looked at each other for a long moment. I did not recognize you at first, he finally said. But your voice, the way you argued, I taught you that. You taught yourself how to leave, I replied. I taught myself how to speak. He nodded slowly, accepting the hit. I am not going to make excuses for what I did. I made a choice that hurt you and your mother, and I have to live with that. Why did you leave? He was quiet for a moment. Because I was a coward. Because staying was harder than going. Because I told myself you would be better off without me. He met my eyes. I was wrong about all of it. I did not forgive him that day. Forgiveness would take time, if it came at all. But we talked. We exchanged phone numbers. We agreed to meet again. It was a beginning. 6 weeks later, I held my daughter for the first time. I named her Grace, after the middle name my mother had given me. She had my eyes and her father's nothing. She was entirely, beautifully, completely mine. The television in my hospital room showed Nathan Mercer being led into court for his arraignment. 12 years for fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. His empire was gone. His reputation was destroyed. His mistress had disappeared with her own child, wanting nothing more to do with the Mercer name. I turned off the television and looked down at my daughter's face. You will never have to beg anyone to believe you, I whispered. I promise, some battles are not won with lawyers or money. They are won by refusing to disappear. My husband thought my silence was submission. He never understood that I was just waiting for the right moment to speak. And when I finally spoke, the whole world listened.